The conversations and information provided are not intended to substitute professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment.
The opinions expressed are the speaker's own and do not reflect the view of Humana Military or the Department of Defense.
Welcome to the Operation Within podcast, where we talk about health and a deeper sense of well-being.
Operation Within is a collective initiative to optimize holistic health matters and nourish within community, within self, and within family.
Thank you for joining the conversation on Operation Within podcast. We are your hosts, Mel
and Marty, and our conversations are real, they're raw, and reflective.
These conversations offer meaningful dialogue on experiences within the military community, oriented to empower and strengthen health and vitality in our communities who serve.
We want to give a special thanks to Humana Military and our partners who have brought Operation Within to life.
Let's dive in. All right, so welcome back to Operation Within. I am so excited to be here with Phil from American Yogi. To give a little background on him, he is a Special Operations Civil Affairs Officer currently undergoing a medical separation board out of Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Phil has served as a Scout Platoon Leader, Executive Officer, Squadron Planner, Team Leader, and Company Operations Chief, and has deployed multiple times in support of operations in the Middle East. He most recently returned from Syria in December 2020. Prior to joining the Army, Phil worked as a photojournalist, covering war in the Middle East and news on the home front. After a training accident in 2015 in which he broke his back, Phil found yoga to assist with his healing and help recover from the loss of several men from his unit in the previous year. Phil founded American Yogi in 2017 with his brother, with the goal of bringing yoga and mindfulness to those who need it most. American Yogi has evolved from a t-shirt brand to a movement, a community, and a tribe of men and women who want to bring peaceful transformation to their lives, and those around them. So, Phil, I'm so excited that you're here, and if you want to begin and maybe share a little bit more on your background, because wow, so many interesting things.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate you guys having me on and being able to speak with you. So I guess I'll give you the background of kind of how American Yogi came about a little more in depth. So in 2015, I was in a training accident. I broke my back. I was in an armored vehicle, slipped on the seat, fractured L2, L3 transverse right across the vertebrae. And I was laid out cold for a solid couple of weeks. And this was 2 weeks prior to going to civil affairs selection.
Wow.
So I went from being laid out on the couch, my screaming in pain every time I had to, get up to drink something or even sit my back up a little. My wife was my caregiver. We went from just laying out on the couch to slowly moving with a walker, to moving with a cane, to being able to walk. And then through my physical therapy, being able to jog, and then somewhat run, and then put weight back on my back to ruck, and then went to selection about 2-3 months later. So came home from selection absolutely thrashed, and I wasn't taking any painkillers at that point. I was totally off my meds, and I had no real spiritual practice at all. I had no physical practice of yoga. All I knew was lifting weights and doing Army PT. So I was in a really rough place. I lost a buddy just a couple weeks before that, really close friend. I was with him when he died. And at the same time, I had lost within a couple weeks. We lost another NCO from my unit on an operation that I planned. So I was carrying a lot of guilt. I was carrying a lot of pain. I was carrying a lot of physical pain as well. My wife pushed me towards yoga. She recommended I try it. And at first, my reaction was, no, that's for chicks. I'm not going to do that. I was a Scout Platoon Leader. I was all these things in a combat arms unit. Like, that was my identity, was that I was this tough dude, and tough dudes don't do yoga. So I resisted it for a couple weeks. And then, I was having a particularly bad day, and my wife recommended it again. And I said, fine, I'll go to a class to please you. And we'll see what happens. During this time, I had also started to dive into meditation practice. So we live nearby Manitou Springs, which has a lot of in Colorado, and has a lot of really cool kind of spiritual communities and different organizations that bring people together to meditate and learn spiritual practices. And being in the rough place I started going out to these like cabins in the middle of the woods, having like these silent meditations with these strangers that, we don't say a word to each other. We'll just walk in and meditate in silence for an hour and then leave. And then I'd go to college campuses and I'd find professors that were running meditation classes just to learn techniques and to try to find myself some grounding. But then I found yoga and I went to the first class and I was practicing on a beach towel. Brought a buddy with me who had never done yoga either. He was also practicing on a beach towel. He was like this big, like 240-pound tanker. Like we stood out like sore thumbs. And the first class, I was like, man, that was really hard because it was a 90-minute hot vinyasa, hot flow. And I sweat my ass off and I felt like I was going to die. And it was also amazing. So after that first class, I was like, I'll go again. And so I went the next week and I started to feel comfortable and grounded. And when I'd walk into the studio, they would remember my name. I would get hugs from the desk staff. And I started to find a community of people that reminded me of the community on being on the line, being in the Army, being, around my boys. But it was based around spirituality and it was based around healing. And so I started to go once a week, and then once a week turned into 2 days a week, which turned into 3 days a week. And then before I knew it, I was going 3 to 5 days a week to practice yoga. So I was really grounded in the practice. I was absolutely loving it. It was doing amazing things for me, being able to center, being able to ground. It was taking some of my pain away from my back. And I really dove into the practice like head first. We PCS to Bragg. And while we were here, my wife for my birthday brought me to a yoga festival up in Charlotte. And we went to the festival, and it was a huge festival. There had to be at least like 5,000 people there. And it was a wanderlust festival. So it was, you do a jog for 3 miles, you do a flow, and then you do I think it was a meditation together. And I'm surrounded by people and we're hugging and everybody's arm in arm and we're dancing. It's like this incredible experience. And I told my wife, I said, I want to buy a shirt to remember this. I want to buy like something. It's my birthday. It's a cool experience. Like I was connecting with everyone. Let's do this. And there was like 50 or 60 vendors lined around this field. And I went to every single one, and not one vendor was aimed at men. Not one vendor had like t-shirts for men or anything that was like marketed or created for people like me or, guys like me.
Yeah, not tie-dye or...
Yeah, and it was all like it was, and I mean it was sponsored by Reebok Women. So if that tells you anything about it, there was one booth though, and it was a yoga tights company. It was all like women's tights, but it was a family that was running it. It was like a brother and sister, and the parents were there. And I was like, man, that's really cool that you guys get to work together, like work with your family. That sounds amazing to me. It's something I would love to do, and I kind of planted that in the back of my head. And I came home and I was driving home with my wife, and I was like, there's something wrong here. This is something that I've connected with, something that feels amazing for me. It's changed my life. Like I feel even my connection, like being around all women. And I think I counted like a dozen dudes there. I felt accepted. I felt comfortable, but I had the idea to start bringing men into the fold. Like what could I do to bring other guys like me into the practice to get this same healing that I've received through yoga and through this community. So my brother, who lives down in Florida, he has an MBA, so he's got some business experience. And we sat down at a kitchen table when he was visiting, and I sketched something out on a napkin. And I said, "This is my idea." I pushed it over to him, and it was just a couple of shirts that I sketched out. And I said, "I want to start a t-shirt company." I had 5 designs, one of which is the one I'm wearing today. It's very simple designs, and I said, I need someone to work with me though that has the business experience, someone that understands these things. My brother said, well, I would love to work with you. Let's do this. So we printed out some t-shirts, started selling them out the back of the truck, sent them to yoga studios, like wherever we could. And this was, when the business just started, it was tiny. And we were just scraping together. But as time went on, we started growing like exponentially. And not only were men attracted to what we were doing, buying shirts, but women became these huge supporters of what we were trying to do. And we realized that we were excluding this whole population that we shouldn't at all. So we started making shirts for women. And then, the next step was evolving from just some company that makes t-shirts to, we don't even like to call ourselves a company anymore. We like to call ourselves, we're a movement. We're a small business that's trying to create change and create peace. And that has sort of evolved into this community, this tribe of people that, that rep American Yogi and that live the lifestyle that we try to push in American Yogi. And, now we sell internationally, we sell, yoga rugs that are made in India. We sell t-shirts, accessories, everything to help bring people in the door. And we try to show them that, there's regular dudes like that look like me and you that maybe wouldn't have found the practice, that now they realize it's an opportunity to find some healing, to find some peace.
That's amazing. Yeah, I find that an access barrier for a lot of men is just going into a class with so many women around and not recognizing your vibe or yourself and those in your community. And a big piece of what fosters community is our recognition of ourselves and others. And that oftentimes is the foundation of trust. And so with these classes, generally, and one thing that's so fascinating to me is in, yoga history and philosophy, it wasn't till the past couple hundred years that really in the 1900s, until women were able to practice yoga. So the version of what we have here in the United States is so different from tradition, and how much marketing and mainstream influences the perspective of what yoga is, which can often, it's like, well, where do I fit in? If I'm, I don't want to be the only guy in the class, and I don't, I'm not going to wear stretchy pants. Like
100%. Like when I first walked into a yoga studio, there was it was all women and me and my buddy. And then, the next class is pretty much the same way. But over the years, since I started practicing, it's incredible to see, like, now it could be half and half. It could be more men than women. And, I've had the conversation, just kind of go back what you were talking about with the version of yoga that you see now in America. It's different than obviously than the roots of yoga. But I've had a lot of conversations with people that say, well, this isn't real yoga. What you're pushing, this isn't aligned with the foundations of yoga. And I tell them, like, look, this is American yoga. This is a version of how we see yoga. And if what we're pushing, if what we're, preaching as far as, the mindfulness and the presence and the movement, if that helps someone find peace, if that helps someone not put a gun in their mouth at night or swallow a bottle of pills, then it doesn't matter that it doesn't align with the doctrinal, the foundation of yoga, because we can change lives through it. So let don't split hairs, and let's jump in and let's try it, in the way that is accessible for us.
Yeah, you're singing my anthem, because one of the biggest things that I find is with the interpretation, for those who are listening that may be new to yoga, yoga is about the union, and really just in tradition, yoga means to yoke. So you can even call a marriage yoga, like it's a word. And then when you break it down, and the practice is all the way back to the Vedic era, in the Indus Valley before, BC times, it was about using the organic structures of our body to find solace. And there's so many versions over the different eras and over the entire world of interpretations and how to use the breath, the body, attention, and relaxation to facilitate different experiences. And so there's so many variations. And this is why, when I talk to people about styles of yoga, I always say it's like ice cream. There's so many different flavors. You just got to find the flavor you like. And that oh, go ahead.
No, sorry, but
yeah, what I was going to say, and if you don't like something, then go try something different. So if this version of the yoga practice is not in alignment with you, or just, like, let's even talk about meditation briefly. If a style of meditation, to sit and be still is not, it doesn't help you, you can actually take the traits of meditation and bring it into fishing and fish and apply those traits. You can take those traits and apply them into different containers where it doesn't have to look one way. And I think that's the biggest thing around understanding what the practice is that there is so many variations. So
yeah, I could not be more in agreement with you. I was just talking to someone the other day, and I explained it as hip hop, right? So there's all different kinds of rap and hip hop. Somebody could say they don't like rap. Well, there's the rap you hear on the radio. There's hip hop that's underground that you have to search for. There's all different types. So if you don't like one, you can't blanket state, or you can, but to blanket state and say, well, I don't like it altogether. Well, you maybe just haven't heard the thing you like. And yoga is no different. Even at one studio from teacher to teacher, you're going to have a whole different experience. And that's kind of what's amazing about it. And, a lot of what I hear from people is, the barrier to yoga is that, I've never done it before, I'm not flexible enough.
Yeah.
I can't, I don't feel comfortable there. So what I tell people too is that, even the military, I have gone through, some specialized training. I've gone to shooting courses, I've gone to, advanced driving courses, all those things. And what I've realized in those courses that they use the same techniques from yoga and meditation and breath when they talk about, firing your pistol better, when they talk about firing your rifle better, visualization and breath. And it aligns so much in ways that people don't even realize that they're doing it already. So yoga is just a different way to access it. And even, you mentioned, how other things can be meditation, other things can be like yoga. I had a counselor. I've been in and out of therapy for years. I went to a counselor in Colorado, and she said, "Have you tried fly fishing?" I was going through like a terrible, terrible point in my life. I was super low in my marriage. I was going through like major depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress, all those things. And I'd never tried fly fishing before. I said, I'll give it a shot. So I took class, got got everything I needed, a pole, and I went out to the river. And the first time I got in the water, I'm standing in the mountains or in the river in the middle of these mountains. And I have to be so particular about, threading the line through the fly, where I'm fishing, like patience, and all those things are meditation. So I could spend 8 hours on the river. I could not catch a thing, or maybe I catch a fish. But in the meantime, I've just meditated for 8 hours. I've just been mindful and present for 8 hours, focusing solely on the task at hand. And people don't realize that's meditation. Cleaning your rifle, cleaning your pistol, whatever. Like all those things, meditation, walking.
It is. It's those traits that are, those traits are the foundation of the practice, right? The concentration, the breath, the movement. And one of the things, so in my teaching experience, I did not start in teaching in yoga studios. I was working with the Wounded Warrior Project, and then at Fort Bragg, the Warrior Transition Battalion, and fulfilling random unit requests and just teaching around every now and again at things around town, but mostly with communities that were not your traditional come to a yoga studio experience. And the truth is I learned a lot of these things through conversations with those who were struggling with engaging in the practice. With my work with the Wounded Warrior Project, a lot of the classes and the workshops, because I did a lot more workshops with them, it was usually the family member dragging their military member along, and being able to relate the traits of the practice to the everyday things that they already do tended to be a powerful way that they can begin to engage with it. And then eventually they started to be more intentional with the rock climbing, with riding their motorcycle, with, these examples that Phil's giving. And so there's so many ways that we already engage with these. And it's really just a fine-tuned awareness of how to use your body.
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head too, with, accessing communities that wouldn't necessarily have been into yoga. In the military too, there's a lot of resistance still on if a unit makes something mandatory, people are not going to want to do it. I've seen in my unit and other units on Bragg, like they want to do yoga. I've taught yoga to the Air Force. I think it's the Air Force Special Operations unit that's right outside of Bragg. And it's hard to get people out. It's hard to get guys to come do yoga. Maybe in a unit of 120 people, I can get 3 guys to come out and do yoga with me. It's different when you're overseas and you have less resources, less access to things. But in home station, it's tough. Even one of the things I love most about teaching is I'll be in the studio and I'll be setting up class, and then someone will come in and it looks like a soldier to me, and I'll talk to him, find out he's from the 82nd Airborne, and his wife saw me on Instagram or heard about my class and recommended he come through. And then I start seeing that dude every week. Like it's amazing that, once you step in the door and you step in the door with someone that feels like you, looks like you, welcomes you, you've opened a door inside where, potentially you can access some parts of yourself that you wouldn't have if you weren't pushed to go do something that maybe is a little uncomfortable.
Well, I think that's where that safety and trust of being able to find the right place or space. And, with the work I do on Fort Sam, because a lot of the new 7-22, their H2F stuff and the ACFT or the PT training stuff, it's in relation now. They're looking at more breath centric and more mobility and accessibility, and just it's expanding in so many ways. So they're asking for more things like yoga to be implemented. And what I found is it really is in the way that it's facilitated. And when service members understand what we're doing, so I never just go out there and start teaching yoga. There's always a 5 to 10 minute explanation of what we're doing today. So they're being educated on the why. And so when we're going through it, they can reflect on that and begin to build their own relationship with the practice. And that has seemed to be really impactful in getting people to, as they say in the military, to buy in to the concept of utilizing this stuff for training. And like you said, for weapons qualification or for preparing for the ACFT or the, just for combative training, right? It's just like memory and retention and concentration. There's so many skills that are a byproduct of these practices, but it really is the frame and the relevance of which we expose this stuff,
No, for sure. I think, something you reminded me of was, what we do as yoga teachers when we step in the studio. Every teacher has a different approach, but, I'm in the same boat as you. When I sit down to teach a drop-in class or, class at the studio, or I may have some military members, I may not, I explain to people what it is that we're about to do and, why it is we're doing it. Maybe give them a nugget or something to chew on, while they're in class. But I feel like as yoga teachers, or at least, the way I look at it is more than anything else, my job as a teacher is to hold space for people. So my job as a teacher is to, people come in, I could have 20, 30 people in a class and they're all dealing with their own issues. Maybe it's physical, maybe it's mental, maybe they're in a great space. There's no telling. But between all those people, with all those different, backgrounds or whatever they're dealing with, the unifier is the practice. The unifiers, they're all there to breathe. They're all there to move. They're all there to sweat. They're all there to let go at the end. And I think that's what's amazing about it. And you can take what you learn in the yoga studio or what you access inside yourself in the yoga studio or wherever you practice, absolutely carries over into your daily life. I remember when I was at Selection, before every event, people get nervous. Their nerves are going and they're kind of jumping around and they're talking to people. And I would sit there and I would breathe and I would meditate. I'd tell myself, I'm going to give whatever I can give. And the rest is going to fall into place, and whatever happens. And just taking that intentional breath, just something I learned, in my meditation practice, allowed me to be calm in a situation that, isn't necessarily the calmest situation. It's stress inducing, it's anxiety inducing. But it all kind of intermixes. It's like a strand of DNA.
Yeah, it's like, because, one way I teach yoga, or I'll say, is yoga is a technology for wellness, and the technology is the training. Like, we're training these neural pathways, these neuromuscular patterns. We're training these things so they're default. So when you meet a trigger, you already know how to down-regulate yourself. And, it's one thing to have the theory of it and just be like, okay, stress, okay, pause. No, it's different when it lives in your body, because it's a rumor until it lives in the muscle, right? And so that's what the practice is. It's like this training preparation for those challenging experiences. And Phil, I don't know if you want to share anything, like examples that you've had where like that was such a beautiful example, but more on how this has helped in your personal life and just navigating some of the mental health things and your journey.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yoga, I tell people all the time, it has saved my life. And I've had people tell me, well, yoga hasn't saved my life. I saved it. Yoga was a vehicle. But either way you look at it, if I hadn't found the practice, I'd probably be in a very different place. There's the time when I started my yoga practice, I lost a really good buddy. We lost, several guys from our unit. I was in physical pain, and my depression was at an all-time low. I was absolutely bottomed out. Around this time, I struggled to feel anything. My first child was about to be born, and I told my wife, I said, I know, I talked about this recently. Sorry. I told my wife that I loved her, and I knew I loved her, but something inside me, the depression, the anxiety, the post-traumatic stress, potentially, like all those things were weighing down on me. And I knew logically that I had all these things in my life that were beautiful and full of love, but I couldn't access them. But once I started my practice, it was like for the first time in my life, I felt like I could be present. I felt like I could, when I was laying on the mat after sweating it out for 75 minutes, that I could start to piece together all the things that were flowing around my head. I was able to, the way I describe it is I had all these papers that were cluttered on the floor, and I can pick each one up and look at it and observe it and understand it, and then put it into that filing cabinet so it's safe and taken care of. So without yoga, I don't think I would have been able to access to the point that I got to where I was myself again, where I felt like I could breathe again. I felt like I could love again. And I wouldn't have had that without the community, without the practice itself that allowed me to be present and actually deal with things, as opposed to just finding unhealthy distractions, like drinking or, technology.
Yeah, they say like with depression, from a yoga philosophy standpoint, it's really a problem with beingness. It's not, we look at it in the US as a mood disorder, but if you go a little bit deeper, it's really not a feeling at all. And that's why there's so much disassociation that happens when navigating depression. And so in the practice, and I can relate in different ways, and I just cherish you and appreciate you for sharing that, because when we start to sense and feel, in the practice, you're feeling sensations, you're learning how to allow the visitor of thoughts and emotions. It's like those papers, Phil, I love that. These papers, you're able to look at it, and then you don't have to become it. You just see it, feel it, maybe you learn from it, and then you're able to detach from it.
Yeah, I think that the most amazing thing as a teacher, and like obviously I'm giving a teacher's perspective, but I'll try to give both as a student and the teacher. But as a teacher, one of the most amazing things is to create this space during class for people of different backgrounds, different races, different genders, military, non-military. All these people come in the room, and they all have this experience. And at the end of practice, to see someone, I come around, I put cool lavender cloths on their foreheads, and I give them a gentle touch to the forehead with a breath, and I try to send my energy to them. And to see people cry, to see people smile, to see people, like, you can watch their whole body melts into the mat. It's amazing that we can foster that experience, wherever they're at, whether it's depression, anxiety, or whether everything's fine. And what I tell people too is, yoga isn't a magic bullet. You're not going to step into the room, do yoga class, and everything's better. But what it does do is it gives you tools. It gives you space. It gives you room to breathe. And I tell my students that even if you don't feel it in this moment, in whatever moment, whether you're in or out of the studio, something I got from one of my counselors too is try to use the space to imagine what it might be like if you did find peace, if you did find breath. And then you keep doing that, over time, you keep telling yourself, or even not striving towards it, but just breathing through it and being present with it, that you get to a point where you're not imagining anymore. You are feeling that sense of peace for, even if it's 20 minutes, an hour, 5 minutes. There's Buddhists that believe that in a single breath you can reach nirvana. And I tell people that all the time, like, that breath is out there. Yoga helps you find it.
Well, it's like just even being able to experience for 3 minutes relaxation, you're giving that experience to your nervous system. Your nervous system doesn't know, if you're sourcing or understand that you're sourcing it from an idea versus something external that made you happy. It's just in that experience you're having that. And I think that it's easy to downplay it because we're like, oh, well, then I still have to go back to my life. But it goes back to your building these patterns. And it reminds me, there's a story. I was working with a Vietnam vet, and he had all types of inflammatory stuff. I mean, he was banned from the Fayetteville VA for crazy stuff. Like he was, and his wife was the one who was like, come to our home. Let's work with him. I love what you do. Let's see what happens. And he was, we laughed, we talked. It was a very lighthearted practice. And over the couple of weeks of working with him and building more trust, what we would do, because I realized so at the end we do something called, I call it relaxation, but in tradition it's called shavasana. And, laying for relaxation at the end can be really challenging. So what I would do with him is we'd go sit on the front porch and feel the sun on the body, because he really struggled with, he had some structural issues, so he couldn't lay on his back. So we would sit on the couch, but it was challenging. So I would only do maybe 3 to 5 minutes of it, but we moved outside and just felt the sun and sitting out there. And after our first time doing that, he was full of tears and he was like, in, 50 years, I have not ever felt that relaxed. And he's like, I want to stay here. And
Yeah.
it just showed this moment for him that, wait, my body could experience this. So for those who feel like rest and peace and those things are just not available to you, in these practices, we go through the body and we're changing some patterns in the body to cultivate this in your mind. And you can have just this one experience that can open up so much potential that peace is a birthright. These senses, it doesn't mean the world looks peaceful, doesn't mean everything gets perfect and fixed, but you have this capability within you to find that stillness, that the feel good, those things.
Yeah. And it's in there. And, sometimes you don't even realize that space, that piece is in there until you sit down and access it. And it's funny, you said he wanted to stay there in that space. I was in class a few weeks ago, and he's a good buddy now. A guy in my class, he's an SF medic, and he had just started yoga. It was his first couple classes. And he's like, man, like I feel a way that I've never felt before. And the problem is when I step out of the room, I tend to lose it. And I explained to him that, you don't need the yoga studio to do that. You don't need, the yoga practice, the asana practice of yoga to stay there. But every time you practice, you're learning a little more. You're tapping into that space. So maybe you hold it a little longer every time. And then, maybe there's days when you feel it. Maybe there's a few hours of the day. But as, soldiers, we spend so long just being on. Mm-hmm. I realized, I've been transitioning now for the past 7 months through the medical separation. And I go to therapy twice a week, and I'm starting to unpack, a decade of trauma, a decade of anxiety, a decade of stress, and all these things that I've just been pushing down for survival, placing into boxes and shoving them down so I can still do my job, and I can do it in a way that keeps people safe, keeps people alive, and that also accomplishes the mission. And you can't necessarily do that if you're feeling everything, if you are, stuck in that space. So the idea of like a Vietnam vet, like that dude has probably been in that space for his entire, since he got home, since he stepped back on American soil, and finally someone informed him of this practice. Someone showed him what is possible, and then your life changes. You can never go back. Once you realize what's capable inside in your brain and your breath and your body, I mean, you're changing the chemistry of your mind. Like there's been scientific studies that meditation actually changes your stress response. And so over time, like you become someone that is not as keyed up as you might have been beforehand. It's just amazing. It's amazing when you really dig into it to start picking apart all the things that you took as normal in your body, and then realize that something that's kind of unhealthy. And here's a way to unpack it.
Well, the body is so oriented to survive. And with our patterns, a lot of times, because the body it's so adaptive. And this is, I've talked about this before on the podcast, how profound and resilient the body is. And I think that when we look at practices like yoga, one of the reasons there can be so much challenge is because it goes against our social conditioning of always being on, like you said, and being able to, really integrate the ability to witness mind and body or experience the two together, because either we're always in our head or we're just getting it done. But in these practices, we're blending the two together. And, maybe I don't know if you want to talk about some trauma and just like how yoga has helped address some of that for you, of bringing yourself back home.
Yeah, I think I found yoga through trauma, and I feel like a lot of people that I speak with, a lot of guys that come to my classes, and a lot of people that contact me on social media are in the same boat. It's funny how, and I just had this conversation the other day, it's funny how we find yoga, or a lot of people find yoga, at least men in my community that I interact with, after the fact, after something happens, whether they need to heal physically or mentally. But in the Western culture, it's not the norm to do these things as what's the word I'm looking for? Like prehab, not rehab.
I love that.
So I feel like that's what we're trying to push. Like that's what the movement is about. It's not necessarily, I mean, it's an amazing way to find trauma, to access that trauma and to deal with it. But also for people that you're creating systems within yourself to deal with those things. I know personally for me, there was a session that I remember in particular. So I've been doing EMDR therapy. I've been doing yoga, obviously, and meditation. And I was able to, through therapy, transform this very traumatic experience. Through my EMDR, the counselor put me in a place where I was back in a moment where I was holding basically a bloody body armor, and all these bloody artifacts of this dude's life who just died. And that's something that I carried for a long time. I carried his watch next to a picture of my daughter on my chest, my uniform, when we drove away from the incident. And the idea that I was bringing back the last piece of his life to his daughter, it's very traumatic for me. To be the one that planned the mission and then to be the one on the recovery team when he died was really hard. And then, I went right back to work and started planning more operations, planning more missions. So that's something I carried for a long time, a lot of guilt. But through, yoga and meditation, I was able to transform that trauma into something that, as opposed to something that dragged me down and something that I would carry like a cross on my back. My meditation practice and, yoga as the moving meditation practice allowed me to transform that trauma into something that I could actually live with, something that I could deal with through just breathing and through meditation and being present with those thoughts, being present with that trauma, and lots of counseling as well. I think for me, and I tell everyone this, is counseling, seeing like a mental health professional, and yoga, if you're dealing with something, should go hand in hand. I take the things that I learned from my counselor, take the things I learned through therapy, and I apply them to my yoga practice. The things that I tell my students in class are the things that I'm dealing with. They're the things the tools that I'm getting from a mental health professional. And through yoga, other people are allowed to access those same ideas and, deal with those same, different traumas, but the same idea of working through pain.
Well, processing, there's two pieces. You have the somatic aspect of what you're holding in your body and those patterns from these different experiences that lead to protectivity and illness later. And then the actual processing of the narrative in the mind. And so the two absolutely are so beautifully complementary. And you're seeing too a lot today how mental health is working collaboratively with these embodied practices, because one thing in traditional therapy, we can work with the story so it's more bearable and it makes more sense, but sometimes it's still, held in the body and it triggers our reactivity, and we might not even know that there's a connection between the two. And I've always been taught in all of my trainings around trauma and just my work, what I've seen is it's not so much about the story. As far as with yoga goes, it's not so much about the story of what's held in your body, but the sensation and being with the sensation so it can be processed, so we can continue, it doesn't define us anymore or operate us. It becomes something that we've just experienced and we've processed with it and through it. And not bypassed it. So.
Exactly. It's easier to bypass, right? It's easier to say, I'm just going to push that to the side because I don't want to deal with it because it's hard. And it's something that I carry. And I know that it's something that has interwoven with my identity. It's something that now I carry as part of who I am. There's a lot of, when it comes to trauma, there's a lot of guilt and there's a lot of shame. But one of the hardest things for me is the stigma of carrying that trauma and having to go talk to a mental health professional, and stepping into a yoga studio at first where I wasn't comfortable. A lot of those things they felt taboo. It felt taboo to talk about trauma. It felt taboo, to go into a yoga studio full of women. All these things that I was doing didn't feel right at first because they were hard, because I'm proud and I had a lot of ego and I didn't want to admit that I needed help. I didn't want to dive into this incredibly hard process of processing, my trauma, of processing my pain. But I'll say, as both a yoga student and a yoga teacher, I haven't found a better, a better vehicle for dealing with my trauma and dealing with, my mental health issues than doing yoga. The way that I teach and the way that I like to practice is in the vein of, when I was in high school, I used to be a wrestler, and then I was a wrestling coach. And when we would be in the wrestling room, we'd put the heat up to 90. We'd all be wearing sweatpants and sweatshirts and multiple layers and sometimes rubber suits to cut weight and all these things. And it's a very cleansing experience when you're in it and you're sweating and you're breathing and you're just present, with whoever you're wrestling or whoever you're grappling with. And my dad actually kind of helped me make this connection because he came to one of my classes one night, and I put the heat incredibly high. I put the music loud. I want people to sweat. I wanted to breathe. And the way that I teach yoga, the way that I try to help others access yoga is in a way that might, trigger something from their past, like something like, oh, this feels familiar. Like when I used to play sports in high school, or when I played sports in college, or, I was an intramural team, like this feels similar. So it makes it more accessible in a way that, okay, I can do, I like this because it's hard on my body and it makes me, it's hard on my mind and it makes me think and breathe. And by the end of it, I'm a little more relaxed. Maybe I wanted to drink before class, and then I went to yoga class and I don't want to drink anymore.
Yeah. And like noticing those differences. I love that, because even just like starting with a posture and then returning to it later for them to see the difference
Yes.
it's just, I want to talk to you about this inclusivity and, different ways. Because, for those listening, if you go to a class, again, like we said, if it doesn't feel right or you don't like it, that's just one class. Every teacher has a different vibe. Every studio has a different vibe, and that can feel very daunting. And it's always, great to read class descriptions and read teacher bios before attending classes. But one thing to note is, when we talk about trauma, and mental health and yoga, and as a yoga therapist with the work that I do, inclusivity is, I usually connect with that through my languaging. I love how Phil just talked about being able to relate it, this lightheartedness, but also with invitational, what that means is, saying things like at your pace or when you're ready. So people feel like they don't have to perform, but they get to just experience and explore and be curious. Phil, I want to hear some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I think about this quite a bit actually. So when I started teaching, I was actually overseas. I got my 200-hour certification right before I deployed to Syria last year. And the reason I got it right before I deployed is I wanted to bring it overseas. I wanted to bring it for myself and for those around me that may have needed it, because we were a tiny little fire base with essentially nothing there for us. So when I got there, I started practicing, by myself, and then I did it in the open so people would see it. And then one person asked to join me. So then it was a 2-person class, and then we would do it out in the open together. And then more people joined. And by the end of deployment, I had a couple dozen guys I was teaching yoga to on the roof of our team house. And the way that the way that I taught was in a way that, all these people that have never done yoga before, it didn't matter. I didn't look at it as, well, maybe he has trauma or maybe he's dealing with this. I looked at it as, all right, here's a bunch of guys that have never done yoga. We're all doing the same missions over here. I know what everyone's going through because I'm going through it too. And this is how I'm going to teach. And it turned out to be like my teaching style developed into something that was very, very accessible and pretty, the in the Army, they talk about things being simple but not easy. So for example, you could do a warrior 2 or, very easy flow, a very basic flow, but you can do it in a way that makes it, harder on the body, without using all these crazy transitions and without doing all like headstands and all the craziness. Like I kept it really basic. And I had a group of guys that loved it. One of those guys that I taught overseas is now in teacher training here because of the
Amazing.
classes that I taught overseas to him.
Yeah.
And he's not the first. There's been several. And so I realized that, what I'm doing is working. So when I'm in class, I teach the same way. So it doesn't matter that I have military, non-military, people that have done yoga, 1,000 classes, or it's their first class. I keep it accessible to everyone because there's nothing in that class that I teach that's going to throw people for a loop. And the way that I teach is I will give cues for everyone. So you can practice with your eyes closed, and it's basic enough where you're going to get where you need to be. I also, so for me, I have herniated disc. I've got arthritis in my back, flattened disc. I've got pinched nerve in C5, flattened disc in my cervical spine. I've got edema on both sides of my hips. I've got tears in my hamstrings. Basically, you name it, tendonitis in the shoulder. I've got enough where when I practice, I need to be very intentional about how I move my body because a lot of things hurt. So rather than teaching a class that you might call basic, or you might call like a restorative or a gentle yoga, I teach things that are accessible to anybody. And I always give lots of variations. So you can walk into a class and you might see even a simple pose, but the arms are stretched out in a way where, it doesn't work for my shoulder, for example. So when I'm practicing my flow and when I'm developing my yoga, I try to come up with ways that, okay, well, if that hurts for me, maybe it hurts for someone else. So I'm going to come up with a different variation. So maybe instead of the arm being up, the arm comes to the hip, for example.
Well, I find also too is if I say find your expression, like really giving them that power to have that self-reflection and then engage in their own agency, which, I feel like in our society, we are so patterned to be like, tell me what you want, tell me what to do, tell me how to do it. Is this correct? Versus to asking our own intuition and having our own discernment about what's right for our bodies. So, when you talk about variations and accessibilities, a lot of it goes into as a student, and this is something to always remember, if you're taking a yoga class and you don't feel safe or comfortable in a posture that the teacher is teaching, you don't have to do it. You don't have to do anything. I always say that this is a suggestion. I've had students have powerful emotional breakthroughs by, being in child's pose for most of class while we were doing other things. So it really is the agency is within you, and the yoga practice fosters that so much.
No, I 100% agree with that. I mean, I think that if you allow people to take postures and to move in ways they feel right in their body, not in ways that you're telling them necessarily. I remind people all the time, we'll do a posture, and the next time we do it, I tell them, so I'm not going to cue you this time. I want you to move in a way that feels right and take the posture in a way that feels right for you. And one of the other things that I do as a teacher is, and some people probably feel differently about this, other teachers, but I don't use Sanskrit at all in my classes. I didn't use it because, as you know, a lot of the poses have Sanskrit names, or all the poses have Sanskrit names. But when I was teaching overseas, I realized that these guys might be thrown off if I start throwing Sanskrit out at them. Just like when I was a platoon leader and I got to platoon, I was a writer before that. I was a writer and photographer. So my vocabulary was through the roof, and I would say things sometimes to them, and they'd look at me sideways, like, okay, I've got to actually speak, in a way that doesn't matter whether it's an 18-year-old private or a colonel or general that understands what I'm saying. So the same thing in the yoga studio. I try not to use Sanskrit because I want people to feel like they're hearing words that they always hear.
Right.
They're
Mutual
hearing things
connection.
yeah. Hey, put your foot here, put your arm here. Okay, this is the posture, and I'll say what it is once they achieve it. Rather than if you hear a word in Sanskrit, you're like, well, I don't know what that is. So I'm
Yeah.
not going to do it.
With my trainees, that's one of the big things is the importance of articulating how to get there over remembering the Sanskrit word. And most importantly, because again, I relate to that, the work I do, I hardly ever use Sanskrit because the communities I work with would, they're going to crank their necks out of in a dangerous position looking at me like, wait, what is this?
Exactly.
So it's communication. I mean, foundationally, the purpose of communication is to convey meaning. It's mutual understanding. And I believe as teachers, it's important that we have that literacy around where our people are to meet them where they're at. And as somebody who's listening, if you're, looking for a teacher, find where, maybe Sanskrit is something that is interesting to you. There's plenty of teachers out there that do and plenty that don't. So this is another example of how there's so many flavors.
Yeah, I think when it comes to yoga, and you may have had the same experience, but I go to classes that I connect with the instructor. I connect with the teacher. If I don't feel like I gel with the instructor, maybe the way they teach, or the things they say, the music they play, like I'm connecting with that person. If I don't connect, then something against them, it's just not necessarily the class for me. So like when I teach, I want to be genuine. I want to be honest. So the same way where if you're on the line, if you're, a platoon leader, a team leader, a squad leader, whatever, if you are not genuine, if you're trying to fake the funk, your people are going to know it super quick and they will tell you.
Yeah.
And it's no different in the yoga studio. If you're in front of a class and you're not being, yourself, you're not acting genuinely, the class is going to know it. And another way that I find yoga accessible, the inclusivity of it is, we're just normal people. This is who I am. I'm not perfect. I'm going to meet you right in the middle. We're eating at the same table,
Yeah. It's
And I
like
think,
holding the human,
yeah, and there's so much, and I've heard a lot of ways that people teach and different kind of trauma trainings. And honestly, when it comes down to it, if you're authentic to yourself and you're holding space for others in need, and if you're a student, you're coming in and you feel safe, then you're there, you know?
Yeah, I feel that when we're so sensitive and we walk on eggshells with trauma, because part of it is our culture, like the taboo-ness of it. And because it's so diverse, I mean, this is the same with the suicide prevention stuff. It's like we don't have one solid answer, so it's very uncomfortable. So then we make up all these rules to feel safe. However, when we operate that way, we're going to miss the whole humanness of the individual, and to be able to create these person-centered experiences because we're just, following through with the list of rules that, this is something to always remember, is that people are people. And I would suggest that just about every human has some form of trauma or, mental health challenge. It's just part of being human in so many ways.
Absolutely. Something that I thought about when you talk about like the rules of trauma or teaching yoga or trauma sensitive yoga. And, I'll be open. I haven't taken a course in it. I have a lot of friends that have, and I have awareness of it, but the rules that I've heard a couple. I've heard that, I think we were talking the other day about this, where you shouldn't play certain types of music, or you shouldn't, play music at a certain volume, or you should, when you give a hands-on assist to someone, a veteran wouldn't necessarily like that. Well, the way I look at it is, I'm a veteran, and these are the things that I like. I have trauma. These are the things that I like. I have depression, anxiety, all these things, and these are the things that I like. So you know what? I'm going to give this to the community.
I have
So,
a really funny story, because I took one, and this was when I was working at the Warrior Transition Battalion, and I originally tried to orchestrate it based off of what I was taught, but meeting these individuals and really participating fully with them, I slowly started to let go. But then one thing that's in my nature is I love doing hands-on assist. And so what I did was I taught the class, and at the end, I gave them the option: palms up if for hands-on assist in relaxation, palms down if you don't want to be touched. And I'm like, okay, they're definitely going to say no. And every single person in the class had palms up.
yeah.
And that was really when I started to really ask myself, am I trusting myself as a facilitator? Am I listening to what is authentic for me? And that's when I started to shift away from a lot of the doctrine around, right, wrong, because, and this is even with functional, as a yoga therapy, with functional limitations and structural stuff, it really depends on the person. And really being able to fine tune our ability to be present with individuals is, that. And I think, we're talking about this stuff as it relates to teaching yoga or being a yoga class, but this is relevant to so many things in life, from resources to medical care to marriage. It's being there and meeting people where they're at. It's a big deal.
No, for sure. I think when we talk about trauma and being, trauma informed, something that I thought about is the best thing about that kind of teaching. So, if you're looking to go to a yoga class, or if you're, a new student, or you're someone that wants to try different things, and you hear about, trauma sensitive yoga or trauma informed yoga, I think there's a lot of value in it when it comes to, maybe there's a civilian, or maybe there's a veteran that hasn't been through, some of those experiences that cause these reactions in the body and the mind. So a trauma informed teacher, trauma informed training, helps that teacher understand, things that may be happening in their students to be aware of. And I think that's probably the I guess most beneficial aspect of like trauma sensitive training, or trauma sensitive yoga, or trauma informed yoga.
Well,
Just as a veteran that's been through, what I've been through, I look at it a little differently, but
yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And also, even with understanding trauma, it's one of those things that it just manifests in so many different ways. So, this is where it's like the complementary aspect to mental health, staying in our scope, but being able to create this really supportive environment that is based off of where people are. And this makes me want to kind of segue into, in your own healing and with this practice, how this helps, you be a better husband, and just attending with your kids, how this has built into your life, if you want to share any of that.
yeah, I think yoga spills over into, I'd say, just about every aspect of my life. Even if I'm driving, I'm focusing on my breathing. When I'm with my kids, I carry a lot of guilt for a buddy that I lost, that left behind 4 kids. And something that I had struggled with, and I still do struggle with, is the guilt of being away, the danger of if I leave, not coming back to them, all these things that I carried. But the more I dove into my yoga practice, the more I understood the importance of being present, the importance of understanding, what's happening in my mind and allowing myself to focus on it and be with it. So it's made me a more present father for my 3 girls. It's made me a more present husband. It's made me, being surrounded by, strong women in the yoga community has helped my understanding of, I tell people I'm a feminist, right? Because I have been trained by so many amazing, strong women. That's an appreciation that I didn't have before I got into the practice. There's so many ways that it's just made me a more, I guess, a calmer, more accepting, less focused on the ego of an individual, where I try to, when I walk through life, when I go through into a yoga studio, when I'm at work, I try to be someone that's accepting of, everyone around them. And if things come up that are stressful, I try to breathe through them and stay calm. And these are all things that I fostered during my yoga practice, being on mission overseas, being in an armored vehicle, turning on and off jammers and planning missions in really dangerous areas, and going on those missions, especially if you're in a leadership position, are really hard, and they're really stressful and taxing, and your mind is just always turned on. But even being on mission, my breath work that I learned through yoga, or sitting in an armored vehicle in full kit for 10, 12 hours, and then being able to get off mission and be able to practice yoga and even do some simple postures to unwind the body. I'd say from head to toe, inside and out, yoga is a lot of who I am now.
Well, that goes to show too that prehab. I love that concept of, the importance, especially in the military, for prehab. And I know we're going to get ready to close this episode here soon, but the things that you're making me think of really mirror a lot with the intention of when working with the military and bringing this work into whether it's training command teams and leadership, whether it's, implementing it into PT. This aspect of the reason why this is so relevant is because it can really condition and prepare the quote unquote human weapon system. That's what we're doing. We're optimizing the human weapon system. So it's not about, okay, we had this issue or this problem and now we got to fix it. It's that we're helping cultivate the skills. So when they come face to face with trauma, with challenge, with we got to respond now, that they're able to do that and recover.
Yeah, I think the recovery piece is probably one of the most important pieces of it, because you're going to carry some things. You're going to experience things that you can't control, but can you recover from it? How fast can you recover from it? And the other thing that I thought about too was, we're talking about all these amazing things about yoga and how it's changed my life, how it's changed your life, how it's changed the lives of, people that we've interacted with and taught, which, some people are going to run out, and whether it's tell their husband or wife, hey, you need to go do yoga. Maybe that person's not ready. If it's like telling someone you need to go to therapy. Well, I'm not ready to go to therapy. I don't need a therapist, for example. Me personally, I do. And I do need, and I do go, but you can't force someone to try to find peace. You can't force someone. You can force someone to yoga class, but they're going to go through the motions. They're going to get out and say, well, that was not worth my time. But if someone is ready, well, then that's when they should step into a studio. But I try never to push anyone into it. I sat, when I was overseas, I sat with a dude that told me that he could never meditate, that he's never been able to, he can never sit for that long. He's only ever been able to do like a minute. And I sat with him, did a 90-minute meditation because he was ready to do it. So all these great things, the amazing things about the practice, how much it can change lives, you still have to be ready. You have to be like open and want that change within yourself. And that's going to a counselor, going to therapy, going to yoga. I think the same,
Yeah, it's huge because quite frankly, you have to within yourself have the will to attend it and allow the change to change you and grow you. So you're spot on. And, this brings up the question of, like you said, when people are ready, where can they begin? How do people begin this practice?
Yeah, so I get that question quite a bit. And the reason that we started doing classes was when I was overseas a couple of deployments ago, I wanted to do yoga and I didn't know anywhere that I could practice it online. So I contacted someone back in the States and I said, hey, do you mind making some yoga videos for us? So when people come to me, I always give them 2 options when they ask, where do I start? I say, the first thing is, if you don't feel comfortable going to a studio, try an online class. We have several on our site. There's other organizations that have free classes online, especially for veterans. You could YouTube it, like look at books, start understanding the postures. And then when you feel ready, go to a studio, research studios around there, go to 4 or 5 different classes, try different instructors, try different types of yoga. There's yin, which is a lot slower and holding postures. There's vinyasa, there's power yoga, like everything you could think of. There's all kinds of different ways, but you're not going to know what you like. You're not going to know what works for you until you dive in. So option one, I tell people, find some classes online, do it at your house so you start feeling comfortable, and then make the transition to a studio. And the other thing I tell people is just to go. Just dive into a studio, dive into a class somewhere. Doesn't even matter where. If you find someplace, just take the step. Move past that point of comfort into a little bit of discomfort, and that's where you can grow and connect. And maybe your first class sucks and you don't like that one. You try a different class. You're like, oh, this is okay, but I'm not sure. You try another class, and all of a sudden you found your teacher. Yeah. You found your class, and then becomes your practice. It's intimidating at first. It's hard to walk into a studio. It's hard to be around, a tribe, a community of people if you're new and you don't necessarily feel like the poses, you're not flexible enough. But what I always tell people is that the yoga studio is the least judgmental place I've ever been in my life. You walk in, like no one's judging you. No one's like watching your practice to say, well, he's not doing that right or not. The teacher is going to guide you. You're going to be in the zone. And eventually, the more you do it, the better you'll feel, the more comfortable you'll feel in the practice. But I feel like it doesn't happen unless you take the step.
Yeah, it's starting where you're at and being okay with, this is not about performance. This is not about, can you touch your toes? It's just about you connecting with your breath. Yeah.
Yeah. I tell people, like, so sometimes, we'll sit on the ground and do a stretch where you lean over your leg and you can grab the back of the foot or use a towel wrap around the foot. And I tell people all the time, it's not about reaching behind your foot. It's about the journey to get there.
Yes.
And that's 100% what it's about, is like, it doesn't matter if you're not flexible. If you can only move an inch, in some sort of posture, or you can just barely get it, but your foot doesn't get in place, that's still yoga.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you can do it. I mean, yoga can be done in a chair, in a hospital bed, on the street. Like, one thing that's so amazing is yoga is accessible anywhere, and I do a lot of teaching of chair yoga, especially when it comes to corporate and military stuff, because, yoga mats are not necessarily accessible. So we can still engage in these practices, or, the cost effectiveness of it. If you can't afford to go to a studio, there's so many free events around town. Like, check out Facebook events. Team RWB has free events around town. And I know Team RWB is in a lot of locations. So if you're not in Texas, there's other places. But check out the free events, or, like Phil said, start online. There's a lot of resources. And what is the website that they can go to access videos with you?
Yeah, so for us, it's at Live American Yogi, LIVE, American Yogi .com. There's a class tab there, and I think we have about 6 classes up. In the coming months, we're going to start putting more classes. We're going to set up a studio where I can teach classes for online, 100% free, 100% accessible. We just want to get people into the practice and give them an outlet. So liveamericanyogi.com, and on Instagram, Live American Yogi.
That's a beautiful place to start. So I love that. Thank you. And for people to reach you, so they can reach you on Instagram and on your website. And before we close our episode, is there anything else that you want to share as it relates to this topic?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we talk yoga in the military, it's very polarizing. Either people are on one side of the spectrum or the other, or maybe someone wants to do it, but they're afraid what their friends might think, or the buddies in their platoon might think, or their boss. What I would say is the biggest thing for someone who's trying to get into it is to take the step. And what you'll find, and what I have found, is that initially when I thought telling, these really experienced, older, tough combat vets that I'm going to therapy and doing yoga, the response has never been negative. The response has always been, how do I get into it? How do I do it? Where do I go? And I think once we put the ego aside, or put the worry aside, what people are going to think, we're allowing ourselves that space to grow. So what I would say is, if you're hesitant, push out of that comfort zone, and you might find that your life is absolutely changed for the better.
Yeah, it's like oftentimes we are hesitant or afraid of things because it's just unknown. We just don't
Yeah.
know until we know. So, or until we try it. So, absolutely. And, you know, there are so many people that it's interesting because there's such a mental health. And I do feel that in the military, this is getting better and better around the stigmas of utilizing these resources and breaking through that. But part of this is, you know, again, finding that community that supports you and, you know, being able to be vulnerable and find that support because it's waiting. You just got to take the step.
Hell yeah. Agreed.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Phil. This was amazing. And it's such a gem to connect with other yoga teachers in the military community. And with your background and experience, you're doing such incredible things. And, you know, again, definitely you guys listening, check him out on Instagram and the website, and their clothes are so awesome. I remember one of my trainees a couple years ago said, "Have you heard of American Yogi?" And showed me the shirts and the clothes, and it was like, yes, we got family everywhere. So
Thank you. That's awesome. I get messages all the time with dudes that see each other in, you know, in foreign countries, both wearing shirts, and all of a sudden they're family. It's awesome. I appreciate that.
yes, awesome. Well, thank you so much, and stay tuned for our upcoming podcast. Podcasts are released every Thursday. Thank you so much, Phil, and we hope you guys find your practice.
Thank you, Mel. It's an honor.